To my knowledge, you're not supposed to have coolant in your wiring harness.
Also not tight at all.
Welcome back to the Lost Cause Ranch. That is right. Once again, we picked up another Land Rover, but this one's a little different because we hooked up the trailer to the Range Rover and headed out to Omaha, a 5-hour trek from here, to meet a couple gentlemen from Colorado.
Omaha of all places.
That's right, and we're meeting up with my buddy Joe from Lost Cause Ranch, who does nothing but old Land Rovers. Now, so this is the madman that agreed to help me out. What's going on, dude?
Not much. I mean, how can we not help someone out who bought what is possibly the best Land Rover to buy? That is right, guys. After Tommy took a ride in the Eco Challenge out in Moab at the Land Rover National Rally, he decided he needed what is quite possibly the best Land Rover to start out with. The original Discovery. Yes, a Discovery 1. I wish I could actually take credit for making Tommy buy a Land Rover, but him and his dad, Roman, have been Land Rover nuts for quite some time, but this particular D1 was quite the find. As most of you guys know, finding a stock and clean Discovery 1 is getting very, very hard, and this thing checks both those boxes. But why is it here at the Lost Cause Ranch? Well, there's one box it doesn't check. Yes, that's a little more coolant coming out of the exhaust than is preferable. It's just doing Land Rover things. So let's get this pulled in the shop and take a deeper dive into what we got to do to get this 4-liter Rover V8 back in top shape. All right, cursory look underneath the hood here. Everything looks nice and tidy, except for that. That right there is not right. Fixed. But no, everything under here looks to be in order, which is good, and kind of somewhat expected with the way the rest of the Discovery looks. Tommy mentioned that it flickered the oil pressure light. Looks like the oil level's good. Oil looks clean. I let this guy get up to temp. I didn't have the same issue, but I also didn't drive it as much as them. I'm guessing we might have a gear in the oil pump starting to get a little bit worn. We also have this. On these Rover V8s, I like to run a thicker oil, something like the Rotella T1540. And I also don't like to run whatever Grease Monkey probably runs. I'm sure that's the bottom of the barrel. So that could be thinning out and not helping the situation. But the main thing it is here for is the coolant leaving out the exhaust. And for that, the first thing I want to do, just for my own curiosity, starting off with a coolant pressure test. What we're doing here is just seeing how healthy the coolant system is. And if we got some sort of big leak going on, theoretically with head gaskets going, it should be pushing coolant into the cylinders right now. So let's set this guy to 15 PSI, let it sit for a few minutes. We could also do a combustion test, and that is where you either have a sniffer or a liquid that reacts to the combustion in the cylinder. And therefore, if the head gasket's bad and as it's firing off, it's pushing pressure into the cooling system, we'd be able to detect that. But it's a Rover V8 and it's smoking out the exhaust with a sweet, sweet smell. We know we got an issue. I just want to see how big of an issue. And while we're hanging out waiting on that, we actually have a front cover off another 4-liter, and we can peek at what goes on with these. This one's actually a clean one that had good pressure, but we typically either see a bit of wear on this aluminum in the housing itself or the gear. This is the oil pump gear that fits right in there, and you can kind of see what type of wear it'll see, and that is the scoring along the inside edge. But the ones that I've found that create most of the issue are the scoring on the end of the gear. You'll get some grooves, and the deeper they are, the worse it gets. I've had them to where they are so deep that it has 0 oil pressure because it can't create a vacuum to suck the oil up. Chewed the gear up because it had no oil to the gear. I suspect this guy is gonna look pretty similar to this one, just maybe something that actually catches the fingernail. We're about 10 minutes in, we've lost 1 PSI, we definitely have a leak. Although some of that leak looks like it could be in this area. We don't see anything pushing out, so it's not actively leaking now. But that is a little suspect to have coolant in there. We could have a bad expansion tank. But the good news there is Tommy already grabbed one. So we're gonna replace that guy either way, but that could also just be from spillage. When you purchase a vehicle and it comes with a fluid starter kit, it's usually not a great thing.
Now you see that as a problem. I look at that as an opportunity.
That also means there could be a lot of spilling because there's a lot of filling, because I believe there was also a little spillage going on there too.
Oh,
How'd you spill it all on the exhaust manifold?
because it's underneath the oil pickup.
Well, we found some of our leak. That's an interesting one. It's leaking out of a wiring harness. To my knowledge, you're not supposed to have coolant in your wiring harness. We have a hose coming off the radiator that's above, but that guy is dry. We got our radiator hose there. That appears to be leaking a slight amount, but that would be dripping down into the valley, which is beneath that. So where are we seeing this from? What is wet? How is that even possible? All right, I think I found it. We got this leak in here. That goes to your heater core. That hose there is leaking right out. That wiring harness is right beneath it, so we're just tracing down to over here and leaking. That's kind of why I like to start out an actual customer repair with a little bit of digging in before we touch it. Give yourself a little bit of a scan of the overall health of what you're gonna touch. If we didn't do this and we decided that all the hoses look good and we start it back up and it has a leak and it goes back to Colorado, that's an issue. So we're gonna avoid that issue. And to be honest, we were gonna avoid that issue anyways, because when we're going this far in doing head gaskets and studs, there is no reason to reuse what could possibly be 30-year-old cooling system hoses. And speaking of customer cars, there might be a few of you who have never come over to the Lost Cause Ranch before, so I'll give you a little bit of a backstory. Before this mess that is called my current Land Rover life, my brother and I used to own a independent dealership service center where we specialized in strictly European stuff, so we inherently did a lot of Land Rovers. We had a nice commercial shop. About 4 years ago, we decided to close that, sell that property, and since then, we built a shop at my house, sold that house, and we just moved into this retrofitted car wash. We bought a building. Not only is it a building, it was once a car wash to give our Land Rover hobby a nice little home. With the 20-odd Land Rovers that I've personally accumulated, they keep me pretty freaking busy anymore. So kind of quit taking on customer stuff. Tommy's Discovery is the first customer Land Rover I have touched since 2022. So please excuse the mess around here a little bit. We're currently moving into the shop, getting everything set up. I parted out a few vehicles right ahead of Tommy's, so there's some stuff laying around. 18 inches of snow put a damper on getting some of that into storage, and I wanted to get Tommy's tore apart so we get parts ordered and here before Christmas. If you stick around for the future, you're definitely gonna see a little more Land Rover chaos. But after our first little look, we are going to start tearing into this guy. What we're gonna do is rip the cylinder heads off. That is a good starting point to getting new cylinder head gaskets in there. But we need to get this thing tore apart so we can make a parts list and give our buddies over at Lucky 8 a call and get some stuff coming so we can get another good Rover sorted and back on the road. You guys probably get sick of hearing this because I say it every time I take one of these off, but this fan shroud is quite possibly my favorite of any fan shroud. It just has the same clips as the air filter box, holding the upper part on. It's the coolest thing ever. And we'll use that fan wrench that we cut out on the plasma to get our fan clutch off. Some of these can be a bit more of a bear to get off, depending on the last time they've been off. They require a little bit of an air hammer persuasion. The water pump looks like it's been replaced on this one, and thankfully whoever did that didn't hammer this back on, because that's usually an issue. For future reference, when these go back on, you don't need to get crazy with tightening them. I'm usually a snug them up, light tap with a hammer type of guy. Some might say a technical tap. It actually looks like it has a fairly recent belt as well. So I think it's been kept up on. We're gonna get some more stuff out of the way here, and it's awful nice that this is pretty fresh in the memory. I mean, we just did pretty much all of what we're doing, and a little bit more on the Eco Challenge when we pulled that out to put the Callaway engine in. I would call an awesome sight. After you've done a bunch of these are kind of an enjoyable thing to work on. There's nothing too crazy. Outside of a couple zip ties on the crankcase hose here, this thing has been pretty well sorted out. It doesn't look like we've had too many monkeys in here messing around. That's still one of my favorite things about the Gems Rover V8s. Not much cooler than some velocity stacks sticking up. Just looks all race car. That right there is 185 horsepower of race car. Compressor out of the way. We're just going to kind of set it off over to the side here. That way we can keep the system all sealed up. If we don't have to, I usually like to leave these guys closed up. No sense in introducing some outside air into the system and having to replace some parts. We're gonna get the evap canister out of the way here too. While we're at it, it kind of snakes through the AC lines there. And I like to pull this guy off as one assembly. Purge valve and the canister all one, because we have the hard plastic lines sealed on to each of those. So we just take the one rubber line with the clamp off, and then that guy's out of the way. And then we can just kind of up right there for now. Gives us room to get our little AC compressor alternator bracket off out of the way. Then we can keep ripping stuff apart, and we're not terribly far away from seeing what's going on inside here. Like I said, it looks like it has a newer water pump in there. The RTV sealant on the bolts is very fresh looking. This guy probably doesn't have a whole lot of miles, so I'm wondering if we had a water pump go out and they possibly overheated it, tried throwing a water pump at it, and that didn't fix the leak in the head gasket, surprisingly. But no, I'm wondering if that is what happened. It looks like that is fairly fresh, and it might have been just a cheaper attempt at saving this guy. The good news is, for Tommy at least, this is a good thing that this thing got overheated, because I'm guessing that it probably wouldn't have got sold had it not had the issue. So Land Rovers breaking are just an opportunity for you to get a Land Rover. People just don't generally get rid of working Land Rovers, so we'll consider it a good thing that Land Rovers break. Another thing that I was giggling at as we're tearing into this guy is what a small world it is. You can see I have some earbuds in. I'm typically listening to podcasts, and today we get to listen to a new episode of TFL while working on TFL truck. You wanna get your paws in on this thing? He actually just wants to go home to sit in front of the fire, I think. You can see we got some fairly new plug wires, which I assume means we have a fresh set of plugs in there as well. We're gonna replace them anyways, but that's always nice to see. We're gonna get the coil pack off, get this lower manifold out of the way. Well, that one wasn't even remotely tight. Interesting.
Also not tight at all.
So these last three were not tight, like barely even finger tight. Can't say I ran across that a ton. Order of operations. Getting a little bit ahead of myself there. We need at least one of the valve covers off for the intake manifold to come up. So we'll rip this driver's side one off, get it out of the way. Luckily, there's just a massive amount of bolts that hold these in place. Yes, 4. And we get our first look at the inside of the engine, and it looks to be in pretty nice shape. We got just a tiny bit of tarnish on the rocker shaft, but that thing is super clean. Look at how clean the aluminum is underneath. Even where the oil sits is not all coked up. That is a good sign. It just means someone was up on oil changes throughout its life. And that's always nice to see, especially when you don't have a service history on the vehicle. Now we can slide this guy out of the way. Drain them into the pan. We got about everything we can do up top done. We need to get a couple things out of the way underneath. Man, this thing has just been a pleasure to work on so far. Everything is coming loose. That's not necessarily the typical case on 30-year-old Land Rovers, especially in my neck of the woods. We're in Iowa, we're in the Rust Belt, but as you can see underneath, this thing hasn't been hanging out in the Rust Belt. This thing is just ridiculously clean underneath. I mean, there is nothing to complain about on this guy. But yeah, underneath here, we're just gonna get the exhaust undone, and we got a couple wiring connectors to get out of the way. And then we can get the cylinder heads off. It's super nice. Change of pace for everything on the exhaust to come off. We'll have to give Tommy a discount, I think. You know, a discount off the price we never even discussed. So underneath there, we were able to get the crankshaft position sensor undone. That's gonna let us swing this harness out of the way of the driver's side head. I think what I'm gonna do is pull this exhaust manifold off before we pull the cylinder head. This side, with the AC lines and stuff in the way, I'm probably gonna leave the exhaust manifold on and pull the passenger side head with the exhaust manifold on there. There's many ways to skin a chicken on this. And it was also interesting, when I was busting all the exhaust manifold bolts loose, the rear cylinder wasn't tight either, just like it was on the intake manifold. So I'm starting to wonder if this is where we got hot. Don't know if we'll be able to see it in the head gasket. I'd be putting my money on this rear cylinder being the one that's causing the issue. I mean, it could just be a fluke, but just seems odd to have the bolts loosening up in this area. All right, now we can get my favorite thing out, the lunch trays. We're gonna use that to keep everything organized here. We're gonna pull the rocker shaft off along with the push rods out. And it looks like we are pretty clean inside the valley as well. This thing is turning out to be a nice one. If we take a peek at the camshaft in there, it looks like all the lobes are in nice shape too, from what we can see. I don't think we've had a serious oil pressure issue. We'd start seeing some of this stuff a little more chewed up than it is. There'd be some significant wear on the lifters or on the lobes where it's riding. It's all good signs so far on this guy. It is moment of truth time. Still super impressed at just how clean this thing ended up being. But we're gonna kind of check what the torque was pulling this guy apart. About 125 foot-pounds on that one. That one was much less. About 60. $133. That was 148. That one was also only 60. 60. That one's tight. Back one's the tightest one so far. 160. 80. 90, one left. That is just strange. So that was 130. So we range from about 60 to 160, depending on where they were at, with most of these inner ones being the tight guys. Kind of looking at some marks on the firewall here, and it almost looks like these may have been done before. And it's been a minute since they have been. If so, right here you can see some marks in the paint, and then someone kind of clearanced that little section. I mean, that rear head bolt is tighter than the rest, but you just got to use the right combination of sockets so you don't run into doing that. That's some clues. We're gonna grab more lunch trays and get our bolts out of the way here. We can pull the head gasket off. All right, so this would be the rear of the cylinder head. And we do have OEM head gaskets in there. Nothing popping out right at the moment. The only thing I'm really seeing so far is right along this edge, which would be up front. Nothing glaringly obvious on the driver's side. Let's get the other side off. And we're gonna do the same thing on this side. 125. That was 70. 167. 70. 150. 80 on that guy. 120. 130. 80. I probably blocked that one, but that was 110. So between 70 and like 170. Now this one's gonna be a tad bit heavier, being we have the exhaust manifold attached still. Get this over to the bench. Grab this. So nothing glaringly obvious on the other cylinder head. Gasket also looks pretty decent, except for this odd little part there, but that corresponds to this side of the cylinder head, so that was probably just from removal. Both sides look decent. We don't have any obvious blowout marks or anything. The cylinder liners look pretty decent for the age. Good cross hatching. Just a couple vertical marks, but those guys are more visible than felt. And I was kind of looking for a little more steaming on at least one cylinder, but we did have coolant sitting in number 8 here. I wiped some of it out just to see what the piston looked like. You can see a little bit sitting down in that corner. And if we look at the piston, it is much cleaner, especially on that bottom side, than the other 7 cylinders. Now you can always get antifreeze dropping into the cylinders as you remove a cylinder head. The stuff sitting in the head has to go somewhere, but being this guy is starting to steam clean all the carbon off, especially on this lower part. This right here is our problem cylinder. When we were pressure testing this guy, we were more than likely pumping antifreeze right into that cylinder, and that would also explain our white smoke on startup. When the vehicle's not running, the pressure in the cooling system is going to bleed off. It's going to use the path of least resistance to bleed off, and if we have a compromised gasket or sealing surface, it's going to bleed right into there. That would explain the smoke on startup, and it would explain that cylinder being a little cleaner, although I'm guessing this hasn't been a very long or major issue because it's not a crazy amount of cleaning going on. We still got some carbon on the spark plug. My calibrated fingernail is catching the liner, so it don't think it is dropped. Get it cleaned up. When these guys start slipping liners, you usually hear that when the engine's warm. That's why I wanted to warm it up. It sounds pretty good. It doesn't sound like we have that issue. I don't believe we have that issue. I truly believe we have a torque issue. So these are going to be torque to yield bolts. It's hard to actually measure the final torque value because what you're actually doing is stretching the bolt as you tighten it. They usually measure 85 to 110 foot-pounds on the final torque value. Loosening a head bolt doesn't give you an exact torque figure as well. You're dealing with a lot of different factors, so you're not going to see a true torque value, but to see 100 foot-pound difference between bolts that should be torqued to the same spec is a little concerning, and I'm guessing that's where our issue lies. So what we're going to do is we're going to clean up these cylinder heads, take a peek at them, then we're going to get them off to the machine shop and get them checked over, make sure they're all good. I'll get the block cleaned up, and I'm actually very happy with how all of this is looking. But yeah, take a peek at how the rest of the pistons look versus how that number 8 looks. Much cleaner, especially where the antifreeze would be sitting, say overnight or whenever you're not running it. So yeah, I think it's number 8. So I'm really thinking a good cleanup on the heads, some fresh head gaskets. But the real solve of what I think happened here is going to be the ARP studs. So we're going to put studs instead of head bolts, and that is going to give us a much more consistent clamping force, along with not risking pulling out threads out of an aluminum block. But yeah, the studs instead of a stretch bolt will be an actual torque value. We'll be able to make sure we have a consistent torque across all 10 studs on each side. But before we go any further with that, we need to get that front cover off. But before that, we're gonna get the oil pan dropped out of the way. It's kind of got a sloppy looking RTV job going on there. Pulling the oil pan's a lot easier when the engine's sitting on a stand. Everything looks in order underneath here as well. Pickup tube looks nice and clean. And the oil looked nice coming out as well. No coolant mixture in there. So we'll drop this guy down to the ground, get this front cover off, and we'll get to see what the gear looks like. And right there is what we're looking to get our eyes on. Now these screws are usually pretty tight. They are a Phillips, so a lot of times we have to use the impact screwdriver, but we'll give it a shot here first, just by hand. And like everything else on this, someone's been in this before. I don't know if you can see it, but all these have some witness marks from someone taking it apart before. But we'll just take it apart again. This is one of my favorite simple tools. You just hold it in the direction you want it to go, push down tight, give it a tap with the hammer, and usually it gives it a little snap, a little impact, and busts these guys loose. This is also what you need on most screws that are in brake rotors. That's what we most use this guy for. That and Rovers that don't have oil pressure. And there's what our gear looks like inside. Well, we got some scoring going on there. All right, so what we got going on here, we got a little bit of scoring on the cap that holds the gear in place, but that's not helping the situation. And we have some scoring on the side of the gear here. You can see those lines. Like I said, I was pretty sure it was gonna be similar to this guy, but just a little bit worse, and we are similar but worse. We have just a tiny bit on the teeth end of the pump gear, along with some on this side of the gear as well. It's gonna be hard to pick up on camera, but we have a couple score lines right here. Maybe able to see them. Those I can catch with my fingertip. That in conjunction with those could be what's letting it drop in oil pressure, especially since they were running 5W30 and probably not the greatest quality 5W30. They said when it was hot, it would flicker the light. I'm guessing just putting some 1540 in would take care of that problem altogether. But what we're gonna do is get a new gear set, and then I may just take one of my known good covers and slap that on there just so we don't have a problem, and keep this one as a spare for down the road if I ever need it. I think just a new gear would take care of the problem, but we got it apart and we have good ones. We may as well just make it right. But all this is pretty minimal. Like I showed you before, they can be much worse. But the outside of it is pretty chooched up. But all in all, I think this is gonna be a pretty straightforward repair. Our cylinder heads look good. We'll get these guys in the parts washer and cleaned up and dropped off at the machine shop just to get checked over. We'll get oil pump gear sorted out. Then we're just a set of fresh head gaskets away from getting this guy on its way back to Colorado. Although the big fix is gonna be the ARP head studs that we're gonna put in. And this time around, we're gonna give it a nice even torque across the entire cylinder head, not 100 foot-pound range. And going from the factory head bolts to the ARP studs is gonna allow us to do that much easier. Your head bolts are a torque to yield bolt where you stretch the bolt as you tighten it, and you're also relying on the aluminum threads inside the aluminum block to hold up as you're tightening this guy down. See, this is spinning as you are torquing it. Whereas the stud is gonna be threaded into the block, and then when you torque it down, you're going to be pulling straight up on the threads, lowering your chance of gulling up the aluminum threads in the block. Over time, especially if they've been done several times, the threads can give way. Over the years, we've had to re-thread and time cert the aluminum blocks in BMW M54s, and the same problem is well known with something like the Cadillac Northstar V8. Aluminum blocks just don't like to hold up to a lot of torque if you don't have a ton of thread engagement. These Rover V8s have a decent amount of thread engagement, so it's not typically a problem, but it can happen. The other thing with the studs is they are not a torque to yield fastener, so we will be able to give it the exact torque spec that we want, and we'll be able to have it even across all 10 studs on each side. So this guy's gonna go together great, and I think it's gonna end up being a nice rig for Tommy. We will get our parts list together, we'll get a hold of Tommy, and we'll get everything coming. And in the next video on this guy, you will see it back together, running, and hopefully ready for those guys to fly out to Iowa, and hopefully a fun road trip back to Colorado. But we should be seeing more of that guy here in the next few weeks. But in some other Land Rover news, we just got a delivery in quite possibly the best delivery vehicle I've ever seen. That is right, Ted brought over the engine for the lightweight in a series truck. So hopefully we have a driving lightweight here pretty soon as well. Not sure what we will see you with next week, but it is gonna be Land Rover related, obviously. But either way, I appreciate you guys watching, appreciate you subscribing, and we will catch you on the next one. And speaking of mess, we got the welder over here in the way too. With all the snow, it's kind of hard to wheel that back over to the machine shop side. We really need to get another walk door punched in on this wall, kind of like that one there. But the welder was out for this guy. That's right, we're really starting to shape up the office. We welded up our brackets to get our series hung on the wall. I think it goes good with the G4 doors.